If you take a close look at a modern political map of the European continent, everything initially seems completely orderly and stable. It presents itself as a peaceful, highly organized mosaic of independent nations, open borders, shared economic alliances, and democratic institutions. But if you carefully slide your eyes across the strategic Baltic coast, nestled tightly and awkwardly between the sovereign borders of Poland and Lithuania, you will suddenly stumble upon a strange, deeply unsettling geographical anomaly. You will find a piece of land that completely breaks the rules of modern geography, international law, and regional stability. It is a highly militarized, intensely fortified territory packed to the absolute brim with nuclear-capable ballistic missiles, heavily armed surface warships, secretive submarine pens, and tens of thousands of elite Russian soldiers. By all structural logic, economic sense, and continental alignment, this specific piece of land should belong to the European domain. But instead, it proudly and aggressively flies the white, blue, and red flag of the Russian Federation. Welcome to Blueprint Depth. This is Kaliningrad. It is a tiny, isolated, and heavily guarded Russian province that is completely detached, isolated, and marooned away from mainland Russia. To travel from the capital city of Moscow to the heart of Kaliningrad by land, you cannot simply drive through domestic territory. Instead, you would be forced to cross through hundreds of miles of foreign, sovereign European Union and NATO territory. It is a sovereign piece of Russia sitting quietly, yet menacingly, inside the very heart of Western territory. To the eyes of the Western world and defense planners in Washington, it is a dangerous, terrifying geopolitical dagger pointed directly at the throat of Europe. To Vladimir Putin and the military commanders in the Kremlin, it represents an unsinkable, indestructible concrete aircraft carrier parked permanently in the middle of the Baltic Sea. But how exactly did this bizarre, accidental territory come to exist in the first place? Why does a massive country located thousands of miles away hold the sovereign keys to Europe's most dangerous maritime chokepoint? Today, we pull back the deep layers of historical warfare, secret international treaties, structural engineering, and iron-fisted geopolitical strategy to uncover the terrifying blueprint of Kaliningrad. And discover why this single piece of land could accidentally trigger the next global conflict. To truly understand the pure structural absurdity of Kaliningrad's existence, we must first analyze the raw, fundamental mechanics of its geographical isolation. In the precise language of political geography, this territory is what we classify as an exclave. A portion of a sovereign country that is geographically separated from the main, contiguous part by the surrounding territory of one or more foreign nations. To visualize the pure madness of this setup, imagine living in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every single house on the street belongs to one single family, except for one random, highly secured bedroom right in the middle of your second floor that is legally owned, heavily barricaded, and fiercely guarded by an aggressive, heavily armed stranger. That is the exact relationship that Kaliningrad shares with the surrounding European Union. It covers a land area of just over 5,000 square miles, which is home to roughly 1 million citizens who speak the Russian language, spend Russian rubles, and live under the direct, uncompromising administrative command of Moscow, despite being geographically surrounded on all sides by nations that view modern Russia as their greatest existential and military threat. But Kaliningrad was not always Russian. In fact, for the vast majority of its long, bloody, and highly complex history, it was not associated with Russia at all. Before the cataclysmic events of the mid-20th century, this specific land was known across the world as Königsberg, and it stood as the historical, cultural, and political beating heart of East Prussia, the proud ancestral home of the German Empire's elite military class, landowners, and aristocracy. For over 700 years, it was a magnificent German city celebrated for its philosophy, advanced science, maritime trade, and grand European architecture. It was the historic birthplace and lifelong home of the legendary Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant. Its bustling streets were beautifully lined with towering Gothic cathedrals, elite universities, and grand Prussian castles. It was a crown jewel of German cultural heritage and intellectual pride. However, everything changed in the brutal winter of 1945, when the architectural blueprint of Europe was violently, permanently, and mercilessly rewritten by the catastrophic tides of World War II. As Adolf Hitler's horrific Nazi regime collapsed into total, fiery ruin under the weight of Allied pressure, the Soviet Union's Red Army marched westward with an unforgiving, relentless, and deeply vengeful fury. Königsberg was transformed into a bloody, heavily fortified stronghold. The historic city was systematically, brutally pounded into absolute dust by waves of British Royal Air Force raids and ferocious Soviet artillery fire. When the smoke of battle finally cleared, the historic German metropolis was completely unrecognizable, reduced to a hollow wasteland of concrete, iron, and ash. Millions of German citizens fled westward in absolute terror or were subsequently, violently deported by Soviet forces, leaving behind a completely empty ghost town. Under the historic Potsdam Agreement of 1945, the victorious Allied powers sat around a mahogany table and fundamentally redrew the borders of the civilized world. Joseph Stalin aggressively demanded this warm-water Baltic port as a supreme prize of war, citing the immense, unimaginable sacrifices of the Soviet people who lost over 27 million lives fighting fascism. Stalin did not just want to claim the physical land. He wanted to completely and permanently erase its German history from the face of the earth. In the fateful year of 1946, the ruins of Königsberg were officially renamed Kaliningrad, chosen to honor Mikhail Kalinin, a prominent and highly revered Soviet revolutionary leader. Joseph Stalin immediately and systematically executed a grand plan of demographic engineering, replacing the vanished German population with hundreds of thousands of civilian families imported from deep within the Soviet heartland. The remaining historic Prussian castles and Gothic cathedrals were deliberately leveled to the ground by explosives, replaced instead by the heavy, grey, brutalist concrete apartment complexes typical of Soviet architecture. Kaliningrad was rapidly and violently transformed from a cultural European hub into a deeply secretive, heavily restricted, and closed military zone. For decades, foreign eyes, journalists, and international travelers were strictly banned from ever entering the territory. It became the ultimate home fortress of the Soviet Baltic Fleet, acting as a crucial, forward-deployed military spearhead designed to launch an iron assault on Western Europe if the Cold War ever turned hot. For nearly 50 years, this strategic setup worked perfectly for the rulers in Moscow because the surrounding Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were also forced, captive republics of the massive Soviet Union. But in the historic year of 1991, the Soviet blueprint shattered into a million chaotic pieces. The Soviet Union officially collapsed and dissolved. Overnight, the Baltic states proudly declared their independence, and Poland turned its back on Moscow to align itself with the democratic West. Suddenly, the international borders shifted radically, but Kaliningrad remained firmly in Russian hands. The military fortress was suddenly trapped in a geographic cage. The Russian land was officially and completely cut off from its motherland, left stranded deep inside a vast sea of newly formed democratic European nations. What had once been the vanguard of supreme Soviet power had instantly transformed into an isolated island of intense Russian geopolitical anxiety. So why did the newly formed Russian Federation, during its period of intense economic weakness in the 1990s, completely refuse to give the territory back or negotiate its release to Europe? The answer is deeply rooted in Russia's eternal, desperate, and historic quest for reliable warm-water naval access. Throughout human history, the vast majority of Russia's massive coastline freezes completely solid during the brutal winter months, rendering its northern and Arctic ports completely useless for naval deployment, strategic maneuverability, and global commercial trade. The port of Baltiisk, which is located inside the Kaliningrad exclave, however, represents a priceless, irreplaceable geographical miracle for the Kremlin. It is Russia's only true ice-free port on the critical Baltic Sea coast. Even during the coldest, most freezing winter months of the year, the waters surrounding Kaliningrad remain completely open, allowing the Russian Navy to deploy massive surface warships, heavily armed guided missile cruisers, and stealth nuclear submarines 12 months a year without any natural interruption. To abandon, sell, or cede Kaliningrad back to Europe in 1991 would have meant the absolute, permanent destruction of Russia's naval and geopolitical presence in Northern Europe. It would have forced the entire Russian Baltic fleet to retreat deep into the Gulf of Finland back towards St. Petersburg, a domestic port that is highly vulnerable to being completely frozen shut for months at a time, and a port that can be easily blockaded by neighboring adversarial countries. For the administration of Boris Yeltsin, and later for the highly aggressive regime of Vladimir Putin, Kaliningrad was never viewed as just an isolated, expensive piece of land filled with crumbling Soviet concrete. It was treated as a non-negotiable, highly sacred strategic fortress that allowed Russia to permanently project its immense military power directly into the Atlantic Ocean and the critical European maritime shipping corridors. As Russia watched NATO begin its steady, relentless eastward expansion throughout the late 1990s, Kaliningrad's value transitioned from a mere naval harbor into a critical forward-deployed military anchor designed to halt Western democratic influence at any cost. But this historical reality reveals an even deeper, far more shocking and mysterious question: why exactly did the Western powers, and specifically a newly wealthy Germany, completely refuse to take Kaliningrad back when the Soviet Union fell apart? During the chaotic, fast-moving collapse of the USSR in 1991, the global diplomatic blueprint was entirely fluid, and the borders of Eastern Europe were being aggressively renegotiated on a daily basis. Legally, culturally, and historically, Germany possessed a deep, multi-century claim to the ancient land of Königsberg. Yet, when informal diplomatic channels and backroom conversations whispered about the radical possibility of returning the territory to German hands, the political leadership in Berlin did something that absolutely stunned international political observers: they flatly, decisively, and aggressively refused to accept it. The structural reasons for Germany's shocking refusal were both deeply financial and intensely geopolitical. In 1991, the West German government was already undergoing the massive, staggeringly expensive, and incredibly complex process of reunification, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into integrating a collapsed, economically devastated East Germany back into its democratic framework. The physical and economic blueprint of Kaliningrad at the time was an absolute, catastrophic nightmare. Its historic German infrastructure had been completely leveled and destroyed, replaced by crumbling Soviet factories, a highly degraded local economy, severe industrial pollution, and a completely bankrupt social system. To absorb Kaliningrad would have cost the taxpayers in Berlin tens of billions of additional marks that they simply did not possess. Furthermore, in order to reassure the suspicious global community that a newly united, massive Germany would never again pose a military or imperial threat to its European neighbors, Berlin signed the historic 2+4 Treaty, officially, legally, and permanently renouncing all territorial claims to its former eastern lands. Accepting Kaliningrad would have instantly shattered Europe's delicate trust, broken international treaties, and reignited the terrifying ghosts of German expansionism that sparked two world wars. If Germany was completely unwilling to take the territory back, why didn't the neighboring Baltic Republic of Lithuania simply absorb the tiny province into its own borders? In the late Soviet era, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had actually offered the administrative control of Kaliningrad directly to the leadership of the Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic. But the Lithuanian leaders possessed an incredible, historic foresight, and they turned down the Kremlin's offer without a single moment of hesitation. They clearly recognized the dangerous demographic trap that Joseph Stalin had engineered decades prior. By completely, ruthlessly replacing the original German population with hundreds of thousands of ethnic Russians, Kaliningrad had become a demographic monolith loyal only to Moscow. If Lithuania had accepted the territory, a massive, overwhelming percentage of its entire national population would have suddenly been composed of ethnic Russians with zero cultural connection to Lithuania. Lithuanian leadership knew with absolute certainty that such a massive, sudden demographic shift would completely paralyze and compromise their long-term dream of gaining total independence from the Soviet Union. They knew it would prevent them from successfully joining the European Union and entering the NATO alliance, as Moscow would be able to use the massive Russian voting bloc inside Kaliningrad to permanently manipulate Lithuanian domestic politics from the inside out. When the Soviet Union finally dissolved into history, the Western Allies were primarily terrified of one single thing: the sudden, chaotic instability and potential civil war of a collapsing nuclear superpower. They desperately wanted to avoid bloody ethnic border wars across Eastern Europe. Therefore, the United States, Great Britain, and their European allies collectively decided that the safest, most stable option for the global blueprint was to leave the existing borders completely untouched, allowing the newly formed Russian Federation to maintain full legal ownership of the isolated Baltic exclave. Having successfully secured its legal ownership through Western hesitation and diplomatic avoidance, Russia spent the next 3 decades aggressively transforming Kaliningrad from a passive, isolated liability into the most heavily fortified, lethal anti-access zone on the face of the civilized earth. When Poland and the Baltic states officially joined the NATO alliance in the early 2000s, Western military strategists initially believed that Kaliningrad would be a weak point for Russia. A stranded outpost that could be easily neutralized and cut off in a potential war. But the strategic military minds in the Kremlin saw the exact opposite scenario. They realized that Kaliningrad's unique, highly central geographic position gave it an overwhelming, terrifying amount of strategic leverage over the entire Western military alliance. If you analyze the military blueprint of Eastern Europe, you will notice a narrow, 60-mile strip of land that connects Poland to Lithuania. This is the Suwalki Gap, a flat corridor of highways, open farmland, and dense forests that represents the most fragile, dangerous geopolitical fault line on Earth. The Suwalki Gap is the only existing land route connecting the Baltic states to the rest of their NATO allies in Western Europe. If an open war were to break out between Russia and the West, the primary strategic objective of the Russian military would be remarkably simple, yet devastatingly effective. Launch a lightning pincer movement. By driving heavy armored tanks and mechanized infantry eastward out of the heavily fortified stronghold of Kaliningrad, and simultaneously driving armored columns westward out of Belarus, a staunch, unwavering Russian ally, the Kremlin could completely close and secure the Suwalki Gap in a matter of mere hours. With one swift, decisive, and overwhelming stroke, Russia could completely sever the land connection between Western Europe and the Baltic states, effectively trapping Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia behind an impenetrable iron curtain of Russian-controlled territory. The Suwalki Gap is a catastrophic strategic bottleneck, and Kaliningrad is the heavy iron door waiting to slam it shut. But Russia's intense leverage over Europe is anchored by an even more terrifying asset: its forward-deployed, high-tech nuclear shield. Over the past 2 decades, Vladimir Putin has systematically packed this tiny Baltic enclave with a dense, interlocking network of cutting-edge military hardware known in defense circles as an anti-access/area denial, or A2/AD bubble. At the very heart of this defensive shield lies the S-400 Triumph missile system, an advanced mobile surface-to-air platform that can track, engage, and target up to 80 aircraft and incoming missiles simultaneously at a range of nearly 250 miles. From the soil of Kaliningrad, these powerful Russian radar systems can look deep into the airspace of Germany, Poland, and Sweden, effectively turning the skies of Northern Europe into a deadly, suicidal no-fly zone for NATO air forces before a single physical soldier crosses the border. Beneath this sweeping anti-aircraft umbrella sits the true wild card of the Kaliningrad garrison, the Iskander-M ballistic missile system. The Iskander-M is a hypersonic, nuclear-capable ballistic missile that travels at mind-boggling speeds exceeding Mach 7. It operates on a specialized quasi-ballistic trajectory, meaning it can actively, violently maneuver in mid-flight to completely dodge and confuse advanced Western missile defense systems like the American Patriot Shield. With a deployment range of over 300 miles, a nuclear-armed Iskander missile launched from the hidden, camouflaged forests of Kaliningrad can reach Berlin, Copenhagen, Stockholm, or Warsaw in less than 5 minutes. This leaves European political and military leadership with absolutely zero time to react, evacuate, or organize an effective counterstrike, effectively holding the capital cities of Europe hostage to Moscow's nuclear ambitions. This constant state of high-stakes military tension, economic blockades, and continuous electronic warfare has fundamentally and permanently altered the social, economic, and psychological blueprint of the people who actually call Kaliningrad their home. For a brief, highly optimistic moment in the early 2000s, local leaders and urban planners envisioned Kaliningrad as the future Hong Kong of Europe. A unique, free trade economic zone where affordable Russian labor could seamlessly merge with Western European capital, tech development, and corporate investment. The borders were relatively open, massive European supermarkets and retail brands lined the clean city streets, and local Russian citizens regularly drove across the borders into Poland and Lithuania for casual weekend shopping trips, cultural events, and family vacations. It was a lifestyle characterized by a highly unique dual identity, culturally Russian, but structurally integrated into the daily rhythms of the European continent. But today, that beautiful dream of international cooperation and economic integration is entirely dead. The Western stores have pulled out of the malls, the foreign factories have shut down their assembly lines, and the international borders have been converted into heavily fortified steel gates lined with concrete barriers, advanced sensors, and armed border guards. The civilian population of Kaliningrad finds itself culturally, economically, and physically marooned inside a highly volatile cage. They are intensely Russian, watching state-run television from Moscow and spending Russian rubles, yet they live a daily lifestyle that is completely detached from the physical reality of mainland Russia. They are the civilian residents of a fortress, acutely and painfully aware that their schools, parks, and modern workplaces sit directly on the dangerous frontline of a potential World War III. Ultimately, Kaliningrad stands as a haunting, brilliant monument to the absolute, unforgiving power of geography over human history. It is a living artifact of World War II, a frozen remnant of the Cold War, and the most volatile flashpoint of modern global politics, all compressed into one single, 5,000 square mile piece of isolated land. It completely shatters the modern illusion of a peaceful, undivided Europe, serving as an aggressive, physical reminder that centuries of bloody imperial ambition, secret treaties, and structural warfare can never be completely erased from the soil. It is a territory born from the violent ash of a fallen German empire, systematically rebuilt into a brutalist Soviet fortress, and maintained today by the Russian Federation as both an iron shield for self-preservation and a lethal, hypersonic dagger pointed straight at the heart of the Western world. Every nuclear-capable missile silo buried deep beneath its volcanic soil, every encrypted radar dish sweeping across the darkening European skies, and every freight train idling at its fortified borders represents a line of immense tension in a highly dangerous global script. As the political blueprint of our world continues to fracture, divide, and move toward a highly unpredictable and dangerous future, this tiny, isolated exclave on the Baltic coast will remain the ultimate wildcard. A geographic time bomb waiting quietly for the single spark that could rewrite human history forever. Thank you for embarking on this deep, cinematic journey into the hidden architecture of our planet's greatest geopolitical fault lines. If you found yourself captivated by the incredible forces shaping our world, make sure to smash that like button, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to Blueprint Depth for more high-stakes visual documentaries. Let us know down in the comments, do you think Europe will ever find a way to peacefully coexist with this Russian fortress inside its borders? Thank you for watching, keep exploring the depths, and we will see you in the next Master Blueprint.